the most softest term, nationalist, are sometimes Nazi units or the units with the Nazi ideology. We would very much like to see the fact that come next week, all the reports that will be surrounding the Azov regiment information, we would see the true background, historical data about this regiment and the role they played in defense of the city of Mariupol. And also we'll be talking about the legal perspective of the upcoming sham trial. Our guests will understand, as you must understand, that this is an off-the-record meeting that this will not be broadcast, and the information you will become privy to will not be referenced, because our experts today will be members of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and they have some restrictions on the information they can share. So we have suggested the off-the-record format of this sit-in. But all the information will be used, and of course, as the source of this generation, of this information, you will be able to refer to. We have failed to engage the representatives of the Azov regiment, and today's panelists will tell you that they are not in Kyiv performing their tasks. As soon as they arrive at Kyiv, we will be able to meet them in person. Let me introduce to you today's panelists. Ruslan Muzychuk is the press secretary of the National Guard of Ukraine. Anna Kalynchuk is the defense lawyer. She will be talking about the legal background. Vyacheslav Likhachev is the expert of the Center for Civil Liberties, a person who is well versed in what is considered to be Nazism. Vadym Holub is the head of the Stratcom service at the National Guard of Ukraine. Perhaps we will begin with Ruslan. Would you tell us what the history background of Regiment Azov is, and what is the background of what we are witnessing today? Welcome, everybody. A phrase that I would begin with is that my narrative would begin something that you don't know may be fraught with all the possible meanings. This is the way the unit under the name as a detached unit at the National Guard of Ukraine, the Regiment Azov. I will tell you at the outset that since the beginning of its creation, that is 2014, there have been a lot of publications, and perhaps we have been in the limelight of the foreign media, unlike any other unit. This unit was set up in May of 2014. One of the main differences as a volunteer unit is that it has never been a volunteer unit. From the beginning, it was a battalion of the police of the special forces and has been since the very beginning part and parcel of the National Guard, unlike other volunteer units that have been incorporated into either National Police or National Guard. In November 2014, the Minister of the Interior has signed a decree that this regiment was integrated into National Guard. Let me remind you that National Guard of Ukraine is part of the National Police with a military unit with the law enforcement functions. They have been the part of the Mariupol-based unit, a unit that is also part of the National Guard. So that was the way it was meant in order to be able to defend our cities and the territories in the east of Ukraine. Having said that, and again, I will draw the line on this point, when we talk about the subdivisions of the National Guard of Ukraine as Azov region, unlike any other political movement, In the first place, we are talking about the defenders of the Azov steel works in the city of Mariupol. That was a brigade, and Azov was part of that. The name Battalion Azov or Regiment Azov has stuck to it because since, as I mentioned, May 2014, indeed it was a battalion. Later in September, it has been broadened to the capacity of a regiment, and it was an unofficial name attached to it. After it was incorporated into the National Guard, it has special status. According to the functioning and its architectural structure, it has been defined by our Ukrainian legislation, and for the time of its existence, its manning structure has been changed, the command has changed, and so forth. One of what I would call fact of why this regiment has been drawing attention of the international media, because when international journalist crews will come to Ukraine, they were willing to see and talk to, in the first place, the Azov regiment, go to Mariupol, see them train, and many of those journalists enjoyed such an opportunity. They talked to them, published articles, saw the training, and witnessed that these are normal human beings, not something that some propaganda outlets are depicting them, citing examples of different violations. I would also like to mention that over the 8 years of the existence of this subunit as an official part of the National Guard, not a single time has been seen when an organization or a person would turn with their claims, saying that a number of violations or any violation has been seen against persons or national minorities. The rest of the panelists will talk about that in detail, but I would like to say that the city of Mariupol, since the year 2014, saw the sitting of the European Monitoring Mission, including the UN bodies, and not a single time there has been a claim turned to the command or to the main directorate at the National Guard in terms of the violations. As for the national minority violations or the Nazi ideology or any kind of fascisms, the city of Mariupol hosted the Greek national minority, including Jewish synagogues and so on. All these organizations have never turned with their claims to us or against us that our units have violated their rights. At the same time, citizens of Ukraine were serving in the regiment, that is to say, Ukrainian citizens of other ethnic backgrounds, including Russian-speaking Ukrainian citizens. Again, I would reiterate that we are talking about the regiment that is incorporated into the National Guard, the 12th Brigade. And their permanent base was in Mariupol. Are you making a record of this? I think we have agreed that we are not doing any record or broadcast of this sitting.
Дякую.
В принципі, основне те, що я хотів розповісти.
Basically, the brief background of what I wanted to share with you is what I have to say. Now, I suggest that we give the floor to Vyacheslav to comment on the understanding of what organizations can be considered and deemed to be nationalist or fascist in a negative sense or in any other sense. As an expert, do you see any background for such an image to be created around the Azov regiment. Indeed, when we are talking about the subunit of the National Guard of Ukraine, then it would make you wonder that we still touch upon these kind of issues, either politological or ideological issue. All of us are aware of the context when the media coverage of the activities of and the very existence of the regiment Azov. We thought we would look at the situation from this side of the story. It would make sense and befitting. I am not related to in any kind of source to National Guard of Ukraine. More to the point, I am not a citizen of Ukraine altogether. I'm a political analyst, and in a way, I am also a human rights activist. For example, I have been monitoring the issue of racial and political or religious issues in Ukraine. So I am part of the civil society and the watchdogs tracking down the situation. From my point of view, not that it looked very strange, but I understand why this turn of events has happened. From a legal point and political point of view, I think it makes sense to reiterate that from the Ukrainian legal bodies or any international watchdogs from the international communities over the 8 years of the existence of the Azov regiment, there has never been a single claim or any expression of intolerance of these people serving in what used to be battalion at first, officially or unofficially called Azov. We've just have mentioned the Jewish community. I am enjoying very warm and personal representatives of the Jewish community in the city of Mariupol. And even those who under these testing circumstances have made it to leave Mariupol into the Ukraine-controlled territories of this country, the members of the Jewish community share the stories of how they cherish and their warm thanks to the situation of the siege that they received from the Azov servicemen. They shared everything they had at their disposal and tried to minimize the casualties in the civilians to prevent the Russian army to cause the so-called collateral damage while they were attacking the city. As far as the politological point of view, the Azov regiment, I think, has stirred not very much inadequate scope of attention, including the foreign media. One of the reasons is some kind of misunderstanding that I would like to draw your attention to at this point in time. It looks as if we are talking self-evident things, but sometimes self-evident things must be explained, as it is a must to explain that Azov is not a militia or any other paramilitary unit as it is referred to in the Western media. It has never been an informal paramilitary unit since the very beginning. It is also worth mentioning that what appears to be self-evident, but unfortunately in the Western media, they don't discriminate between the following things. One of the reasons the image of Azov has been created as a nationalist or nationalistic unit is the misunderstanding between the political movements set up later on by those people who were serving in the Azov. Either they contributed to this mess and they bear part of the responsibility. The Azov was the brightest page in their personal careers in their lives, and they exploited the name of Azov as a brand to signify their own political ambitions. Now they are not formally associated with this regiment in any way. It cannot be denied that amongst the people who back in 2014 were either serving in or did something to create Azov. But of course they had to do to the ultra-right movement. For example, the first commander of Azov, Mr. Biletsky, after they distanced themselves from Azov, let me remind you that Biletsky in autumn of 2014 was elected to be the member of parliament in a single vote majority, and he went on with a political career of his, setting up a number of NGOs, such as National Core. Of course, it can be characterized as a nationalistic one, but comparing it with the political views expressed by Andrei Biletsky prior to 2014, namely before he was imprisoned a couple of years before, he saw some kind of serious evolution towards temperate worldview, as well as his friends who joined him in his political career before the Russian invasion in 2014. More to the point, those who have joined the Ministry of the Interior or National Guard from the political movements after the hottest phase of war, the first Russian invasion of 2014 and 15, they went into the politics, and perhaps it was 7 or 8 years since they have had any relation or association to the Azov regiment. So they have no right to represent this unit from any political worldview. This is a subordinate unit of the National Guard. It's not a political subgroup or any political group. It's not a military branch of any single political force, as is the case of representing them in the Western media. And to try to understand or interpret their activity through the political prism of the views of people who organized it means to disorient and misinform the audience, something that unfortunately some media have not been able to avoid or escape, and they are still making advantage for their own political gains, the brand of Azov. So Azov is part of the national police, and it has nothing to do with the political affiliations or ideologies. As it has already been mentioned, this unit was and has been and currently is a unit whose POWs are still in the captivity. They represent different ethnic identities, Azerbaijanis, Crimean Tatars, and other ethnic minorities of Ukraine. And it would make you wonder how it does not in any way relate to ultra-right ideologies. I personally know two of the people that the head of the Jewish community of Ukraine, Mr. Zissels, he mentioned that about 20 Jews who served in the Azov regiment so far. As for the information data spread on behalf of Azov, there has never been any kind of propaganda or intolerance or Nazi philosophy. Some public information in the public domain were run in the Russian language, and in the spring of this year, We saw information in Russian condemning the Nazi ideology, something that was not a holier-than-thou political stunt. From my point of view, knowing personally people who have served as military men in the Azov, I will not take up any more of your time, but I will tell that I, some time ago, tried to answer the question coming from foreign journalists on Azov and political movements around it and their political characteristics. I can refer to what has been written in English and German and other foreign languages, and I am ready to answer your questions if there are any.
Нещодавно
Also, something that we have not mentioned but has happened, Russia has recognized Azov as a terrorist organization. There is probably no logic to comment in Russia, including the legal logic behind their action, but what can this mean? Why has this been made? What can it mean from the legal standpoint? Do you have any influence on this pseudo process? Anna, explain, please. Hello, I am Anna Kalynchuk. I am an independent lawyer, and I would like to shape our legal discussion into the realm of observing human rights and the rights of the servicemen, because this directly relates to the facts and the events that are happening right now in this context of Russia's full-scale invasion, and specifically with the Azov regiment. As other speakers have mentioned already, and I would like to point this out too, the so-called regiment Azov, or the special unit Azov, is the unit of the National Guard of Ukraine. So basically everyone who is a member of Azov is a service person of Ukraine. They are covered by the same legislation that has to do with the military, military charters, and Ukraine's obligations under international agreements, and specifically Geneva Convention. This is important because these people are servicemen, and when they are imprisoned by the aggressor state, according to Geneva Convention, they are recognized as prisoners of war, as combatants. Therefore, they are covered by the same guarantees that are provided for by the Geneva Convention. And the main important guarantee is that they cannot undergo torture, they cannot undergo the same tools and rules that are used for criminals of any state, and in this case the Russian Federation or Ukraine. So a combatant cannot undergo the same procedures as persons who have committed crimes, for instance, in the territory of the Russian Federation. And in the practical sense, this means that these people, for instance, cannot be kept in detention places such as, for instance, in jails or the so-called correction colonies. And surely Russia is not following this requirement for the Ukrainian servicemen. Also, it's very important that the combatants, prisoners of war, cannot be subject to a court process in a country that is part of a military conflict. They have to be transferred to Ukraine, since they are servicemen. And Since recently in the Russian Federation, on the 2nd of August, the court has recognized Azov as a terrorist organization. In this, we can see several manipulations at once. First, there is a substitution of terms here. A military unit, a structural unit, is called an organization, and then it's called a terrorist organization. Although, according to Ukrainian legislation, there is no organization, Azov. That's a unit, a military unit. And also, in this regard, we can see from the legal standpoint that the Russian Federation is attempting to use this play on words, thus escaping the necessity to observe the rights of the Ukrainian prisoners of war, substituting their status of prisoners of war combatants with the status of organization members, and in their understanding, terrorist organization member. Going deeper into the legal details, I would like to point out that recognizing Azov as a terrorist organization is only legally valid in the Russian Federation itself. In this regard, this should have been organization doing its activity in the Russian Federation. But again, Azov was not performing any activities in the Russian Federation. They were only implementing the defense tasks to protect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity in Ukraine. And in this regard, they cannot bear any responsibility resulting from this quasi-laws and quasi-procedures, either in the Russian Federation itself or the self-proclaimed republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, which are right now temporarily non-government controlled territories of Ukraine. And also from the international standpoints, these territories are seen as the territories effectively managed by the Russian Federation, which means the Russian Federation bears all the responsibility for all the illegal actions against Ukrainian servicemen. If you have any additional questions about my remarks, I'm ready to explain in more detail. Now let us ask Vadym to say a few words about how this myth came up about the nationalist unit or a terrorist organization or whatever. I believe everyone remembers Putin's ill-famous speech before they attacked Ukraine. We will not quote all of his words, but mainly the key phrases were about the idea that all of us are fascists and Nazis, and all of us had to be very quickly denazified. Therefore, they started their denazification. We could see that in Irpin, in Borodyanka, and other cities. I believe these are obvious effects for everyone in this room. However, in order to make such a speech, Putin needed to have some context, because one cannot just say that, okay, someone beside us, our neighbor, is a Nazi or fascist or whatever. So before that, they conducted a series of information operations, and they have targeted Azov for several reasons. First, the majority of its members were motivated to defend their country, I would even say every member of Azov was ready for that. Of course, there were several stages. First, it was a volunteer unit, then it was a P unit of the police, then it became a special purpose unit, but these were the people ready to protect Ukraine from any enemy, and Putin needed some context. If you are following this closely, if you look into the older messages from Russia, you will find also information about other units. They are also Nazis, fascists, etc. Today, I had a chance to speak with one civil society organization which looks into Russian propaganda. And according to their information, in 10 days, they are going to complete the study of how the Russian propaganda has changed this volunteer unit in the mass consciousness, attempting to label it as Nazis and fascists. Those of you who are interested to see the full text of this study, please inform Alina Frolova about your desire. And once the report is ready, the text will be sent to your emails or sent in any other way. So the key messages were already shared by the speakers. And let us now proceed with questions and answers. So if you have any questions or comments, please start. Current form, I have a question to the lawyer. Is there any information about the members of Azov that were exchanged? Did they undergo treatment? Do they feel well? Yes. Those who were exchanged right now undergoing the recovery and rehabilitation process. Is this what you were asking about? Yeah.
My name is Marco Ferraro. I work for the European Union here in Kyiv, also on strategic communication. A question to Anna. Your second point was about that recognizing Azov as a terrorist organization is only legally valid in the Russian Federation itself. What do you mean with that? That it is only legally valid on the basis of the Russian legal system? So that, are you making an analysis of how the law was applied from the Russian side, and you're saying that even from their own point of view, they are doing something wrong? Or on the context, it's clear, I understand. Technically, this point I would like to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. First and foremost, we need to point out that Russia is a non-democratic state to such an extent that even this court ruling about recognizing Azov as a terrorist organization is not published. It's not public, so no one can actually know the motivation behind this ruling. Why the Russian government made this decision about recognizing Azov as terrorist organization. And in this regard, recognizing Azov as a terrorist organization is very difficult to communicate to anyone or explain to anyone. It's very difficult to explain why the reasoning behind the Russian government's decision is incorrect or illegal. Since this decision was made on the territory of the Russian Federation, this is important because there is a general principle in every legal system in the world that the legislation of a particular country can only have force in the territory of this country and also when applied to the citizens of this state. And speaking of the crimes committed, in the same way the crimes have to be committed in the territory where this law has power. In our case, the servicemen of Ukraine, members of Azov, are citizens of Ukraine. Therefore, they are governed by the Ukrainian legislation and the part of international legislation of which Ukraine is a part of and which Ukraine has ratified. We cannot use the law of the Russian Federation, applying them to the citizens of Ukraine if they have not committed any illegal action in the territory of Russia itself. And members of Azov, our servicemen, have not committed any crimes in the territory of the Russian Federation because all the time they were in the territory of Ukraine. And even in the procedure of the so-called evacuation, which basically ended up with imprisoning our servicemen, this procedure also happened in the Ukrainian territory. And one more very important point is the general global legal system defines the impossibility of time reverse action of the law. Basically, if the law is enacted today, we cannot apply it to the events that took place, let's say, a year ago. And in our case, we can see exactly such chronology. The establishment of Azov, their military activity, their actions for the defense of Mariupol happened first, then happened the evacuation activities, and only then the Russian Federation approved this law stating that some organization with the name Azov is a terrorist one. From this standpoint, we can see that the Russian Federation is trying to create certain legal facts based on the things that existed in the past. Basically, today they are condemning the fact that some time ago Azov was established in Ukraine, and they are trying to describe the very fact of existence of Azov as illegal activity. But the procedure of establishment and also enrollment for the armed forces of every country is under the competence of this country. This is the realm of sovereignty of Ukraine. It defines what types of military units are established in our territory to ensure national security. And in this part, the Russian Federation cannot tell Ukraine what to do, and it cannot recognize any of our military structures as a terrorist one. We only see one aim in this, to substitute the terminology and not to follow through with the rights and guarantees that our servicemen deserve. Thus, they intend to proceed with illegal actions, illegal justice against the citizens of Ukraine in the Russian Federation.
I would also like to add here that during the martial law, the National Guard units fall under the subordination of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and act in accordance with their plans in terms of the military aggression. National Guard of Ukraine, including the detached unit of Azov, while they were performing their combat tasks in the city of Mariupol, are subordinated to the armed forces of Ukraine, one, and secondly, as other components of the defense of the garrison of steelworks, including the State Border Service, National Police, Territorial Defense, Marines, and other units of the armed forces are all comprising the defense forces according to the designs and plans over that territory designed by the General Staff. They were captured, and according to that, they were performing the tasks received by and from the General Staff of Ukraine, and to single out some parts of them and implying that they were acting in an illegal way from the point of view of all the orders doesn't make sense, because not a single unit of the armed forces of Ukraine does not perform their tasks on their own. They are performing the tasks or orders issued by the Chief of Defense or the Operational Defense or Operational and Tactical Defense and Command, the so-called chain of command. So they are performing the tasks designed by their command or the commander-in-chief. All these units don't act on their own. This is where we are talking about the fact that the detached unit of special functions, while they were taken prisoners of war, including other components of the defense of the city of Mariupol, they are being kept in captivity. Their status cannot be changed. There is some false argument that they were performing some either ideologically driven tasks. Doesn't make sense. And this is an important point to the effect that apart from being an official part of the National Guard, the Azov regiment were acting in the context of the single plan designed by the General Staff in the light of the military and armed aggression. It is also important to distinguish between the following points. You heard the word organizations. Azov is not an organization. The Azov that we are talking about here is a detached unit of special command. What does that mean? They officially are incorporated into a Ukrainian military unit number 3051, and they are acting in accordance with the general plan of defending this country. I think this is a classical example of when a recognition as a terrorist organization is legally null and void. This is part of the information warfare, where the information takes precedence over the meaning or senses of the military aggression over the Russian Federation.
I have a two-part question related to each other. First one is, what is the Ukrainian government approach to foreign extremists who may come here thinking they understand Azov and want to join or participate? And similarly, what is the Ukrainian government approach to informing law enforcement, specifically FBI, of an understanding of exactly what Azov is about or what its history is?
To whom this question?
First question. I will only partly answer your question within my remit, as for the fact of how foreigners can serve in the bodies and units of the National Guard of Ukraine. In legal terms, only Ukrainian citizens can serve in these parts. The foreigners don't serve in these units, including the detached unit. The nationality, the ethnic background can be different, but nationality must be a Ukrainian. As for the Foreign Legion and other volunteers, is a question that has to do with the competences of the armed forces. When we talk about Azov, as it is the case today, in the Azov region, only citizens of Ukraine are serving.
Ukrainian government positively identifies for instance, an American who is a Nazi extremist who comes to Ukraine attempting to be part of the reason for his own ideology. And I understand, he doesn't know about the Foreign Legion, for instance. But if a person comes here under the other purpose, what does the official government do with that?
I don't think that
There is, so you have to address to the MOD, Ukraine Defense Ministry, because they are in charge of forming that foreign legion, and they are more specifically can explain you how it works and how the individual can be checked in terms of his maybe views and so on and ideology. So if you want to get an official answer, it's better to address the MOD because we don't have any foreign legions and we don't have foreigners as a part of the National Guard.
As far as FBI, because they report in the past, basically, in the past the FBI has listed Azov as a extremist organization and even alluded to terrorism. So what has the Ukrainian government in the past done to correct that with the American officials?
So maybe there were some addressee to our foreign minister, but we don't have an official invoices about that question. That's the first point. Another one that I heard about the attempt of 40 congressmen, U.S. congressmen, to identify Azov as a Nazi or terrorist battalion, but that attempt wasn't successful as far as I understand. That was just a kind of political movement in the United States, but they wanted to call terroristic or Nazi organization in the world, and Azov was a part of that, and maybe in my respect that that was the point, the propaganda and the informational sphere and all the information that was existing concerning Azov for that time. But officially, our main department or interior minister, we haven't been informed during these years, during at least 7 years, since it's a part of National Guard, about the attempts of some governments of some countries to call this organization as Nazi organization or any kind of that.
Питання.
Славко Твердохліб.
Tverdokhlyb representing TV7 channel. Perhaps I am referring to the defense lawyer. The evidences that we have, I come from Mariupol. During the hostilities, we know that in their humanitarian centers, they were gathering evidences from the ordinary people to the effect that Azov were executing people, torturing people. From the legal point of view, how relevant are these pieces of witnesses legally? How relevant is this evidence that they are putting together the so-called evidence base? Does it make sense? I can answer from my personal point of view. The goal of putting together such a basis of evidence is to accumulate a volume of information that has not been substantiated in order to tie these evidences to the commitment of war crimes by the Ukrainian military. So the general goal, the way I see it, and fundamentally, this can be used, of course, against the persons who are now prisoners of war to submit them to the quasi-legal processes. From the point of view of international law, any evidence that has been obtained under duress when you are armless person and the aggressor states demand that you provide evidence, this automatically is what we call evidence under the threat of life. So we should treat this very critically, and the evidence by the people coming through the different source of filtration procedures. Unbiased nature of such evidence is null and void, and this is unequivocal. They will not be enjoying any jurisdictional force. Russian propaganda has been very strong, and it covered not only the territory of Ukraine, but elsewhere. For example, I will quote the following example: a story of how the main investigation body of Japan published a claim, and they also later on apologized for doing this and excluded the Azov regiment from the list of international terrorist organizations. That is to say, they believed the propaganda, then they sorted out this information and came to know that this was a propaganda stunt. Inter TV channel, organizations of the show trial, mock trial, will they be legally brought to justice, because this will take place in the territory of the so-called Lugansk People's Republic? Are the organizers legally viable? In my introduction, I mentioned that the European Court deems that any act by different representatives of the DNR or Lugansk People's Republic are puppets of the Russian Federation. In this context, Ukraine all the rights in the international context, believing that it is the Russian Federation that holds responsible for all the actions and illegal actions done and committed in the territory of the Lugansk or Donetsk People's Republics, a territory that Ukraine believes to be of its own, but Ukraine has lost control over this territory. Whether the organizers will be brought to justice is a question for the future proceedings, including the International Criminal Court. We also should be aware that we are dealing with a faith-breaking enemy that does not recognize any rules-based actions. The Russian Federation does not recognize Rome statutes, does not recognize the conventions of the human rights protection, and accordingly it does not recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. So Russia is trying to build up the shields to protect it from the criminal responsibility. That does not necessarily mean that their actions are not international crimes. Ukraine is insisting on this, and as a civilized country, Ukraine is taking advantage of all the legal tools, including the appeals to the European Court of Justice, European Court of Human Rights, in order to make sure that internationally these crimes have been recorded. Whether they will be criminally liable is a question for the future visions. Alina Turishin from the 24 channel. We will remember the story that we all know that Russia does not live up to its international commitments. We remember the story that goes back to 2019, when in the United States, 40 representatives from the House of Representatives signed an appeal to the Secretary of State, with the appeal as claiming that Azov should be considered a terror organization. What was the response from Ukraine, and what the consequences were? What was the follow-up to that story? At this point in time, we journalists, the very name Azov cannot be mentioned in our articles because Facebook will block such an information. The Azov servicemen cannot fully print their name because this will be banned. What is Ukraine doing? Perhaps we should address the United States or social networks not to face such problems. Thank you for the question. Indeed, this is an example when the authors or the signatories of this appeal, even the representatives of the United States House of Representatives, when they were trying to enlist into the so-called nationalist militia Azov. That is to say, they did not realize that they were talking about the unit in the ranks of the National Guard of Ukraine. They were under the influence of some rhetoric and spinning. Of course, there was a collision in terms of legal discussion within the United States. That appeal did not have any political repercussions, and there was a clarification submitted by the Minister of the Interior of Ukraine, by the Azov themselves, and it was good that not only the Ukrainian but the international pundits shared the view and got the message across that this doesn't make sense. It was absurd, and the shaping and the wording of the appeal to include Azov into the list of international terror organizations. It was only in Japan, and I wouldn't remember the word-by-word quote the way they were enlisting. But in Japan, they excluded Azov from that list of terror organizations after they cleared the air. As for the social platforms like Facebook or YouTube, what we are saying here is that perhaps it's not a matter of official communicating with the governments. It has to do with their inner politics of these networks. I think in an official way there has been an attempt to communicate with them, and in some cases that are commercial corporations and they have their own rules that don't necessarily look up to the policies of the United States or Ukraine for that matter. Google and YouTube communication has been more successful. As for the Facebook, it was less successful, but what is done and what is worth doing is not at the level of the state, but on the level of the professional community, and I think this will bring positive changes. I will also add that since perhaps 2015, all the posts mentioning Azov were banned or deleted, and when our press officers and we were writing letters to Twitter or Facebook, we received the feedback there were claims against such posts. It was not the name per se, but the claims against the Azov naming. That's why the posts were deleted. Sometimes the post did not have the quote of Azov. There were only pictures with 2,000 or 3,000 claims when Twitter or Facebook blocked such photographs and such posts. We were writing letters and trying to explain that there was no breach of the rules. We received the feedback from Twitter or Facebook that this post received a lot of claims that they were breaching the rules against the national minorities. That was the case that related to, for example, national minorities. It looks as if it was the work of the bots. And we will also remember how many posts are now being deleted because this is under the rubric of the sensitive contents, for example, the war in Ukraine itself. It is also very important to remember that this is a hybrid, unconventional warfare. And it is important in this process to remember that informationally every unit can be destroyed. When we talk about Azov, the conclusion here is this: every Ukrainian knows. Many people abroad know what is going in the eastern part of Ukraine, Ilovaisk, the Svetlodarsk-Shirokinsky operation, the liberation of Mariupol, among other pieces of information. All of them mentioned Azov. This is their battle history, the fierce fighting in Ilovaisk and other cities. This is a very strong unit, and of course it is being targeted. For that reason, its image in this country as well as abroad is very resilient and strong.
Hello, I'm Maria Kostenko, CNN. I have a question about the prisoners of war, members of the National Guard who are not members of Azov. Specifically, those who were imprisoned in Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Can you share anything about them? This communication about the exchange of prisoners of war is quite sensitive. It's not being discussed in public until there is some successful result. I hope this is understandable. The National Guard, since the very beginning, has been working together with all the structures involved in this, including the ombudspersons, including the Ministry of Defense, etc. It's never about Azov members only. It's about every defender. And these people were deported first to the territory of Belarus, after the troops retreated from Kyiv region. But there were many other prisoners of war taking part in the battles in the eastern regions where the defense operations were on. One more important issue here is identification, because all the cases where we can confirm the case that there were battles and people were imprisoned by the enemy, we are providing such information. But also there are persons gone missing. Quite often these concepts get intertwined. At the same time, we are taking every effort to use all the mechanisms available to the National Guard as a structure to update the lists of these persons and to communicate this to the relatives of those people. Thank you, everyone. We were planning to have this meeting for 1 hour. I hope this information will be useful for your reporting in the future. And also, once we get the research that Mr. Holub has mentioned about Russian disinformation, we will be able to distribute it among the participants of our today's event. But also we as communication specialists are watching closely the narratives disseminated by Russia, and Azov is clearly one of the most vocal examples. So I'm very grateful for the fact that organizations are dealing with dispelling such myths. And thank you so much for your attention. Follow us on social media and Telegram, and follow our updates on the next events. Thank you.